John Jacob Astor IV was born on July 13th, 1864, in Rhinebeck, New York, into one of the richest and most powerful families in the United States. He was the great-grandson of John Jacob Astor, the first multimillionaire in American history, whose fortune laid the foundation for the Astor dynasty. From the moment he was born, wealth, influence, and expectation surrounded him. His family represented old American money, quiet power built on land, trade, and long-term control rather than spectacle. Astor's father, William Backhouse Astor Jr., was a dominant figure in New York society and real estate. His mother, Caroline Webster Schermerhorn Astor, known simply as Mrs. Astor, ruled the city's elite social world with absolute authority. She decided who belonged in high society and who did not. Growing up under her influence, John Jacob Astor IV was exposed early to discipline, hierarchy, and the unspoken rules of power. He was taught that wealth was not just money, it was responsibility, control, and legacy. Astor received an elite education befitting his status. He studied at St. Paul's School in New Hampshire and later attended Harvard University, where he focused on engineering and science rather than finance alone. Unlike many heirs of massive fortunes, Astor was not content with simply managing inherited wealth. He was intellectually curious and technically minded, showing early interest in mechanics, architecture, and innovation. This mindset would later separate him from other members of America's wealthy elite. When his father died in 1892, John Jacob Astor IV inherited a fortune estimated at over $85 million, an extraordinary sum for the era, equivalent to several billions today. Along with this wealth came control over vast real estate holdings, particularly in New York City. Astor became one of the city's most powerful landlords, owning hotels, office buildings, and residential properties in key locations. His real estate empire helped shape Manhattan's skyline during a period of rapid urban expansion. Unlike passive investors, Astor took an active role in expanding and modernizing his holdings. He understood the future of cities, vertical growth, luxury accommodations, and centralized locations. He financed and developed major hotels that catered to America's rising elite and international visitors. These projects were not only profitable, but strategic, reinforcing the Astor family's influence over New York's social and economic life. Astor also diversified beyond real estate. He invested in railroads, technology, and industrial ventures, understanding that America was entering a new era driven by engineering and infrastructure. His business decisions reflected a balance between tradition and progress, respect for old wealth combined with a clear vision of the future. This combination made him one of the most respected businessmen of his generation. Despite his immense fortune, Astor lived with constant pressure to live up to his family name. He was not simply John Jacob Astor, he was the Astor, expected to maintain a dynasty built over generations. This burden shaped his character, reserved, analytical, and cautious, yet ambitious. He preferred influence over attention and structure over chaos. By the early 20th century, John Jacob Astor IV stood as one of the most powerful private citizens in the United States. He was wealthy beyond imagination, socially connected at the highest level, and deeply embedded in the economic engine of New York City. Yet beneath the polished image of inherited power was a man driven by curiosity, innovation, and a desire to leave his own mark, one that would ultimately place him at the center of one of history's most famous tragedies. Astor's position in American society was unique. He belonged to a shrinking group of families whose power was inherited rather than newly earned. At a time when industrial tycoons like Rockefeller and Carnegie were redefining wealth through industry, Astor represented continuity. old capital adapted to a rapidly changing world. This distinction often placed him between two eras: the aristocratic traditions of the 19th century and the aggressive modernization of the 20th. Although reserved in public, Astor was highly disciplined in private life. He maintained strict routines, valued order, and believed that long-term planning was the key to preserving power. He studied urban development trends, followed technological progress, and carefully evaluated risks. His approach to business was methodical rather than impulsive, which allowed him to protect and expand his fortune even during periods of economic uncertainty. Astor also believed that wealth carried a duty to shape society. He supported scientific research, engineering projects, and intellectual pursuits, viewing progress as essential to national strength. Unlike many social elites who focus solely on status, Astor showed a consistent interest in how systems worked: cities, machines, and organizations. This analytical mindset would later influence both his inventions and his worldview. By the time he entered middle age, John Jacob Astor IV had secured his position as one of the most influential businessmen in America. His name was synonymous with wealth, stability, and authority. Yet despite his success, Astor was not content to remain a silent custodian of inherited power. He was preparing to expand his role beyond real estate and finance, into innovation, personal ambition, and ultimately, history itself. Despite being born into extraordinary wealth, John Jacob Astor IV refused to live solely as a passive heir. Unlike many members of America's elite, he possessed a deep fascination with science, engineering, and invention. From an early age, Astor demonstrated a technical mindset, believing that progress and innovation were as important as property and capital. This curiosity would define a lesser known but significant side of his life. Astor held several patents and actively worked on mechanical designs. One of his most notable inventions was a brake system for bicycles, created during a time when cycling was becoming increasingly popular. He also developed improvements for road paving equipment, reflecting his interest in urban infrastructure and modernization. While none of his inventions revolutionized industry, they revealed a man deeply engaged with how machines worked and how technology could improve everyday life. Beyond mechanics, Astor was an early supporter of scientific research and experimentation. He followed developments in engineering, chemistry, and military technology, maintaining correspondence with scientists and inventors. His intellectual interest extended to writing as well. In 1894, Astor published a science fiction novel titled A Journey in Other Worlds, which imagined future technologies such as space travel, climate control, and advanced energy systems. Though the book was not critically acclaimed, it demonstrated Astor's forward-thinking imagination and belief in humanity's technological destiny. Astor's personal life, however, was far more controversial than his inventions. In 1891, he married Ava Lowell Willing, a young woman from a prominent Philadelphia family. Together, they had two children. At first, the marriage appeared stable, but over time, differences emerged. Astor's disciplined, analytical nature clashed with Ava's desire for independence and social freedom. By the late 1890s, the relationship had deteriorated, and the couple divorced in 1909, a scandalous event in high society at the time. The controversy intensified when Astor married Madeline Force in 1911, a woman 30 years younger than him and younger than his own son. The marriage shocked American society and drew intense criticism from newspapers and social elites alike. For a man known for restraint and tradition, the decision marked a dramatic break from expectations. Astor appeared indifferent to public judgment, prioritizing personal choice over reputation. Despite the backlash, Astor seemed genuinely devoted to Madeline. He shielded her from public scrutiny when possible and ensured her financial and social security. The couple traveled extensively, spending time in Europe and Egypt. During this period, Astor withdrew somewhat from public business life, focusing more on family and personal interests. His priorities had shifted, from empire building to legacy and continuity. Astor's private character was often misunderstood. Those close to him described a man who was reserved, methodical, and emotionally controlled. He was not flamboyant or reckless, but neither was he detached. He valued loyalty, structure, and long-term planning. His fascination with invention and science reflected a belief that intelligence and preparation were the true foundations of power. By the early 1910s, John Jacob Astor IV stood at a crossroads. He had secured his financial legacy, explored innovation, and reshaped his personal life at great social cost. The next chapter of his story would not be defined by business or invention, but by fate, circumstance, and a single journey that would place his name permanently into world history. By 1912, John Jacob Astor IV remained one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the world. Despite personal controversies surrounding his second marriage, his position in American society was unshaken. That year, Astor and his pregnant wife Madeline planned to return to the United States after an extended stay in Europe. To do so, they chose the newest and most luxurious ship ever built, RMS Titanic. Astor was not impressed by spectacle alone. He carefully evaluated safety, construction, and engineering before boarding. The Titanic was widely advertised as nearly unsinkable, a floating symbol of human progress and technological mastery. For Astor, a man who believed deeply in engineering and modern systems, the ship represented the future. On April 10, 1912, he boarded Titanic as one of its most prominent first-class passengers. Life aboard the ship reflected Astor's status. He occupied one of the most expensive suites on board and moved among the highest social circles during the voyage. Yet witnesses later noted that Astor was calm, reserved, and distant from excess celebration. He spent much of his time reading, walking the decks, and ensuring Madeline's comfort. At the time, no one aboard imagined that the journey would become a defining moment in modern history. On the night of April 14, 1912, Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic. At first, the collision seemed minor. Many passengers returned to their cabins, unaware of the danger. Astor, however, quickly grasped the seriousness of the situation. He assisted Madeline onto the deck, helped her into warm clothing, and escorted her toward the lifeboats. When it became clear that women and children would be evacuated first, Astor did not protest. He calmly asked whether Madeline, who was pregnant, would be safe. Officers assured him she would be placed into a lifeboat. Astor helped her board lifeboat number 4, ensuring she had blankets and assistance. He asked if he could join her, but was refused due to the evacuation rules. Without argument, Astor stepped back. This moment would define his legacy. Witnesses later recalled that Astor stood quietly on the deck as the lifeboats were lowered. He did not attempt to force his way aboard, despite his wealth, influence, or status. He accepted his fate with composure, remaining aboard the ship as it slowly sank into the freezing ocean. John Jacob Astor IV did not survive the sinking. His body was later recovered from the Atlantic, identified by personal belongings. He was returned to the United States and buried in New York. Madeline Astor survived, later giving birth to their son, who would never meet his father. Astor's death shocked the world. Newspapers across Europe and America reported not only the loss of immense wealth, but the manner in which he died: calm, dignified, and obedient to the rules during chaos. In an era when power often meant privilege, Astor's final actions stood in stark contrast. He did not attempt escape at the expense of others. He chose order over survival. In the aftermath of Titanic, Astor's legacy evolved. He became more than a wealthy businessman or controversial social figure. He was remembered as a symbol of restraint, responsibility, and discipline in the face of disaster. His actions reinforced the idea that true status was revealed not by wealth, but by behavior under pressure. Financially, Astor's estate passed to his heirs, ensuring the continuation of the Astor legacy. Historically, his name became inseparable from Titanic, not as a victim alone, but as an example. His story is often cited as one of the clearest illustrations of the social codes of the early 20th century and the personal choices made during catastrophe. More than a century later, John Jacob Astor IV is remembered not for how much he owned, but for how he acted when everything was lost. His life represented inherited power, innovation, controversy, and control. His death transformed him into something else entirely, a figure frozen in history at the moment when wealth no longer mattered. His story remains one of the most human chapters of the Titanic disaster. A man who had everything, faced the end calmly, and left behind a legacy defined not by survival, but by character. If you'd like more stories like this one, real history, real people, and real events, consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow and brings more documentaries like this straight to you.